AskReddit by MLKKK. Was there anyone who tried to warn us about something that happened but we didn't listen? Who? Harry Markopoulou notified the SEC 3 times that whatever Bernie Madoff was doing wasn't legit and should be investigated, and all 3 times he was ignored. He talks about it in his book No One Would Listen. Check it out if you want to see a real facepalm example of government incompetence. Harry Markopoulou noted Bernie Madoff's return on investments were mathematically impossible. Nobody generates the exact same return, 14.1%, year after year in the stock market. They were building a big baseball stadium in Wisconsin and it was a considerably windy day. The crane operator was tasked with lifting a large structure but refused, stating dangerous gusts. The site foreman dismissed the crane operator and called in one who would do the job with no pushback. Well, the crane tipped over with a load and workers were killed. Foreman and second operator were arrested, and the first operator won a wrongful termination lawsuit. You're referring to the Big Blue disaster. Roger Boisjoli, https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/Roger_Boisjoli engineer involved with the space shuttle program who warned his superiors 4 months prior to the Challenger disaster that launching in cold weather could cause the O-rings to fail. Care to guess what caused the Challenger disaster? And for his trouble, he was a pariah to future employers. Punished for his integrity. Turkish Airlines Flight 981, https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/Turkish_Airlines_flight_981 would never have happened if McDonnell Douglas and Convair had heeded Dan Applegate's https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/Dan_Applegate warning about the cargo doors coming open during flight. He wrote a memo after the non-fatal American Airlines Flight 96, https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/American_Airlines_flight_96 advising that the doors had design flaws which would cause them to show as properly latched even when they weren't. If nothing were done, he said it would lead to catastrophic failure that would likely result in the loss of the plane. However, the fixes would be expensive and no one agreed who would eat the cost, so proper upgrades were put off. Instead, they tried implementing cheaper band-aid solutions that would ultimately prove ineffective. I remember watching that instead of fixing the issue they put a small window for the baggage handler to check if the door was latched properly upon closing. Unreal how they shifted enormous responsibility to the lowest paid worker. Thankfully, the courts told them to pound sand after the crash when they tried to blame the baggage team. Ignaz Semmelweis, often described as the father of hand washing. In the 1800s he discovered that infant maternal mortality could be drastically reduced by doctors washing their hands between patients. He was largely ignored and his book got absolutely slated. This is supposed to have contributed to him having a mental breakdown and he died in a psychiatric hospital. Not just between patients, between working on cadavers and delivering babies. 12 TRW engineers resigned their positions the morning of the Challenger incident in protest against risking the flight. NASA launched anyway. Should have listened. I genuinely did not know this, but it puts the tragedy in an entirely different light for me. Deleted. Otto von Bismarck in the 1880s I believe said that when the Great European War came it would come out of some damn foolish thing in the Balkans. Edit Colleen Rowley warned her FBI superiors in the 1st of June that names on their jihadi watch list were taking flying lessons but not interested in learning how to land. Her report didn't get read until October. I think you mean Colleen Rowley. Cynthia Rowley appears to be some sort of fashion designer. H.G. Wells said he wanted his epitaph to be "I told you so. You damned fools." In the Land Ironclads, 1903, He had written about a stalemated war fought by trench warfare that was broken by the invention of tanks, predicting what would happen in WW1. In The War in the Air, 1907, he predicted how airplanes would be used in war, including aerial bombardment of cities, and saw his predictions come true in WW2. Nervously side-eyes a copy of War of the Worlds. Bismarck warned the ruling German monarch of his time that Germany's status in Europe and the relative peace of the continent would last for only a short time. After his forced resignation, Bismarck said, "Jena came 20 years after the death of Frederick the Great. The crash will come 20 years after my departure if things go on like this." 20 years later, Germany loses WWI and almost collapses. It will be some damn fool thing in the Balkans that sets it off. Pearl Jam warned us about Ticketmaster years ago. Nobody listened, now we're stuck with them, and only them. The sad thing is when I bought my ticket to see Pearl Jam at Hyde Park in July via Ticketmaster. Harry Markopoulou. He figured out what Madoff was up to, and the sec still blew him off for years, presumably because the proof he was presenting required math to understand. Harry's motivations really spoke to me. His boss said, "Hey, I need you to invent a financial product exactly like this one that this Madoff character is selling. He is taking a lot of our customers." Harry went on to use math to prove it was either one of two things. Front running, where if you are a market maker and you have a list of orders from your clients, you can sneak your orders in just before since you know it will change the price right after. This does not scale to the levels Madoff was claiming as profits to his clients, but at the time it was considered an option. They did not know how much he was claiming he was profiting across all his investors. The second possibility was just a straight up Ponzi scheme. He told his boss it was not mathematically possible to do what Madoff was doing, and the boss blew him off because he thought Harry just didn't want to work hard. Li Wenliang. https://en.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/li_Wenlian _ a Chinese doctor who tried to warn people through his private social media about COVID-19 on the 30th of December 2019. Was summoned by the police in China for spreading disinformation. The Chinese government had been the first COVID deniers. https://wgbh/frontline/article/china-timeline-of-china's-response-in-the-closed bracket during the virus's earliest stage and contributed greatly to the global pandemic. Li died of COVID in Wuhan on the 7th of February 2020. I remember watching a clip on Reddit in December of 2019. The caption was something like "Chinese government building hospitals overnight" with a time-lapse video of buildings being built, non-stop, day and night. It was on damn, that's interesting. At the time, I wondered what the significance was and considered it not interesting at all. Flash forward less than 90 days and none of our lives are ever going to be the same. John O'Neill. He worked in the FBI as an anti-terrorist officer. After the car bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993, he remained convinced that Al-Qaeda would try to finish the job. The FBI convinced itself that it was over, and O'Neill, who kept at the investigation, was passed over for promotions to the point he wound up quitting the FBI. They thought he was too obsessed with it. He took a job managing security at the WTC and lost his life on the 11th of September. Great doco about him and the security failures he wanted to prevent here. Frontline, the man who knew. https://www.youtube.com/watch?mark/pbxpqwggq5u He died saying, "I fucking knew it." In 2005, Courtney Love was asked what advice she'd give young, up-and-coming actresses. She said, "If Harvey Weinstein invites you to a private party at his Four Seasons hotel room, don't go, and for whatever reason, you didn't see her in many movies after that. Pretty sure she even said she would get blacklisted for saying it. Edit. Just found the video from 2005 and she said I'll get libeled if I say it. https://yahoo.be/zbvsmomabh8. Every single junior officer working in Afghanistan for the last 20 years who universally called the ANA a worthless pose army and their government a hollow, dead money pit. I came home so disillusioned. It seemed like we took warlords and called them governors and said yay, democracy. Sinead O'Connor. Suddenly a cover-up at the Catholic Church of child abuse doesn't seem so silly. She was speaking from personal experience, having attended a Magdalene laundry in her teenage years. https://www.irishpost.com/news/an-open-letter-from-sinead-o'connor-report-3212. Nikola Tesla. There was a book he wrote, a pamphlet really, called The Problem of Increasing Human Energy. https://www.amazon.com/problem-increasing-human-energy-harnessing/dp/16052000956 where he talked about slowing down the process of burning carbon until we understood it better. There were a few people around the end of the 19th, start of the 20th century who understood the huge amounts of CO2 we were emitting into the atmosphere was essentially a huge experiment, and the consequences could be severe. Svante Arrhenius is a famous example. One of NASA's engineers warned them that Challenger would explode due to frozen O-rings. They ignored him and launched anyway. While not to the degree that it ended up being, but Eddie Murphy took a shot at Bill Cosby's holier-than-thou attitude in his comedy special Raw in 1987 during the height of The Cosby Show. Hannibal Buress, the stand-up comedian, had a joke in his act that talked about Bill Cosby years before it really came out. It was an open secret in the stand-up community. Cassandra of Troy was pretty spot on about that wooden horse. Cassandra had the gift of accurately predicting the future, and the curse that no one would believe her. You've got to admire the sheer level of spite and imagination that the Greek gods could muster. President George Washington, in his address when leaving office, he warned against the danger of a two-party system in future politics. He felt that several parties on equal footing would be better, especially in presidential elections. The more legitimate choices, the better. Eisenhower and the military-industrial complex too. The guy who predicted the levees would collapse in a strong hurricane. Category 2 or 3. Not 5 as they predicted. He knew the tide surges would destroy New Orleans and predicted it down to 1%, the deaths, damage, destruction and water damage. No one believed him, and he had computer simulations and printouts he tried to show Congress and tried to tell them to prepare for the worst, including tents for shelter. He was laughed at and later fired. 2 years before Katrina. Seth MacFarlane has made fun of sleazy people in Hollywood 4 years before the Me Too movement. Help, I just escaped Kevin Spacey's house, says Stewie, running naked through a crowd of people. Spacey's basement, but yes, I remember that one too. Lots of experts warned about the FTX fraud. The writing was on the wall. Idiots chose to ignore the red flags and made huge investments. Common people was lured in by the perceived trust. There are people, like me, screaming that Tether is exactly the same, and it's still fucking there with the better part of $100 billion in assets. Tether is not backed with real assets, and when it explodes, crypto will be in some real big shit. Billy Mitchell. He predicted a Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in the 1920s, and warned the Navy that they needed to spend more money on air defenses and less on ships. Thought you meant the Donkey Kong guy for a second and was confused. Jason Salami, epidemiologist at USF. No one knows him, that's cool. I was working on medical ML research, glioblastoma at the time, and was asked to help analyze some data about a new virus in China. In the middle of January we had a research meeting, and Dr. Salami said, "I don't like this one. I have a bad feeling about SARS-CoV, as it was then called." On February 2020 I was put full-time on the SARS-CoV-2 team. The rest is history. People thought he was being alarmist. We had recently been through a pair of Ebola outbreaks in Africa, couple of bad flu seasons, etc. People thought it would blow over. Deleted. Courtney Love warned young women in Hollywood not to hang out with Harvey Weinstein like 30 years ago. Edit. It was in 2005, so not 30 years ago. The CIA. Bin Laden determined to strike in us was the title of the President's daily brief prepared by the Central Intelligence Agency and given to US President George W. Bush on Monday, the 6th of August, 2001. The brief warned, 36 days before the 11th of September attacks, of terrorism threats from Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, including patterns of suspicious activity in this country consistent with preparations for a hijacking of US aircraft. 20 in %20 us %20 was %20 the %20 title. Monday %2C %20 August %206 %2C %200 2001. The worst part was that at the time, the FBI and the CIA really didn't talk to each other much. If they had, the FBI could have stepped in and attempted to do something to stop it. The whole not talking to each other was quickly put to an end after 9/11. Corey Feldman was on The View or something and tried to tell people that Hollywood is full of predators, and the hosts just laughed at him and tried to make him feel guilty for outing them. The financial crisis that was given by economist Anna Schwartz in 2005. She warned that a housing bubble was developing and that it would lead to a financial crisis, but her warnings were largely ignored. The housing bubble was big news in 2005. See also, This Year-End Animation from JabJabin05, https://m.yahoo.com/watch?3THHRQLGDSK /. The problem was actually timing when the crash would happen, and the fact that bankers were making big sums of money right until the point of no return. Isaac Asimov in 1980. There is a cult of ignorance in the United States, and there always has been. The strain of anti-intellectualism has been a constant thread winding its way through our political and cultural life, nurtured by the false notion that democracy means that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge. The many women who tried to speak out against Larry Nassar and had it get swept under the rug by USA Gymnastics and Michigan State. And Armonique Mosinu, who warned us about the Carolies and the corruption in USA Gymnastics and was called a whiner by the mainstream media. Hundreds of girls were molested and there were so many places where it could have been stopped. Gary Webb, https://i.red.it/ins1prnhy8x51.jpg He found ties linking them, edit, the CIA, to the crack epidemic that wasted inner cities in the 90s, and justified the war on drugs, while also destabilizing the Nicaraguan government. He was basically raked over the coals for it, and wound up committing suicide with 2 bullets to the head. Congrats to him for receiving the CIA's award for journalism. Francis Alden Kelsey and the thalidomide scandal. The drug thalidomide was marketed in the 50s to treat a variety of conditions, anxiety, insomnia, but mainly morning sickness. The drug was determined to be safe in pregnancy without being tested in pregnant women. Thalidomide was widely distributed in Europe and Canada, but not in the US, mainly due to the efforts of Kelsey. She was working as a reviewer for the FDA at the time and blocked market approval of the drug in the US due to the lack of evidence for safety. This decision was met with pressure from the drug manufacturer, but she insisted that the drug be fully tested and safety data be presented. Lo and behold, It was discovered that thalidomide crossed the placenta and is teratogenic. aka, it can cause birth defects. Unfortunately, by this point thousands of babies in other countries around the world had been born with severe malformations, limb atrophy, hearing loss, malformation of the digestive tube etc. That number doesn't include those that died before birth or were stillborn. About 20-something years ago, I read articles in CBC about eve teasing in India, which was basically men groping women and how it would turn into outright gang rapes if the practice continued to be accepted. I was speaking to my Indian mother about this when she xenophobically said Group X of people are all criminals. I pointed out that was how people viewed Indians. She was really dumbfounded. I showed her 5 YouTube channels with collective 10M subscribers about Indian scammers and told her about all the stories about Indian rape. I knew the penny dropped when she immediately changed the subject to the Fendi handbag that she just bought. Sadly, half of the women I knew who grew up in India were victims of SAR as children. I wish I didn't know that. President Eisenhower warned the United States about the dangers of the military-industrial complex as he was leaving office. We didn't listen. https://yahoo.be/gg-jvhinp9y. Edit. udestro23 made mention of this in an earlier comment that I missed. Give that comment the upvotes, not mine. There are quotations there too. Alice Stewart in 1958 discovered the link between X-ray of pregnant women and childhood cancer. She discovered that cancer mortality was around 40% higher in the children who had been X-rayed in the womb. Her findings were considered unsound for another 25 years until after her formal retirement, when they were reviewed due to her continuing to push the issue. It wasn't until the 1980s that X-ray of pregnant women stopped being commonplace. That Chinese doctor in Wuhan is first that comes to mind. I cannot find the clip, but about a year ago at a crypto conference a guy went on stage and publicly said that FTX was a huge fraud and we would all see. Al Gore got an entire apology episode from the creators of South Park after they mocked him for trying to warn people about climate change. Edit, here's a clip from the episode. https://www.youtube.com/watch?J89KEWNBHQ4 He got a double episode. David Attenborough, and I don't think we are listening. Well, certainly not doing enough. I've been watching his documentaries my entire life. If you ever want to be really depressed, just watch one documentary per decade that he didn't watch. The tone shift from nature is wonderful to we don't have much time left. John O'Neill, https://en.m.wiki.John_p._o'_Neil who tried to warn about 9/11. https://www.911memorial.org/connect/blog/John-O'Neill's-FBI-jacket-and-passport-embody-his-enduring-fight-against-terrorism. For anyone who hasn't watched the show called The Looming Tower, I highly recommend it. It's on Amazon, Hulu and the some regions. Very well written and acted show. Also learned about Ali Salfan, as well as John O'Neill. The year before the Grenfell Tower fire that killed 72 people in the block, Edward Daffin warned in an online post, "It is a truly terrifying thought, but the Grenfell Action Group firmly believe that only a catastrophic event will expose the ineptitude and incompetence of our landlord, the KCTMO, and bring an end to the dangerous living conditions and neglect of health and safety legislation that they inflict upon their tenants and leaseholders." That comedian, when the internet was just booming in the 90s, saying it could be used for great things but would probably create a narcissistic society. Yeah, dead on, mate. My mother. Of course she warned the 18-years-old me about the scumbags I had as friends were going to hurt me one day. Did I listen? No. I was just so frightened of being alone friendless I didn't listen. Then I got hurt badly. My dad used to tell me he could spot fake friends while I was blinded by them. I didn't listen. Now I have daughters and they don't listen to me either. Hindsight is 20/20. In 2002 I heard Scott Ritter, former chief weapons inspector for the UN, explicitly say there are no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, but we seem to be invading them anyway soon, and he was 100% right. Edited, above name was incorrect. Edward R. Murrow warned us about the dangers of the television medium being used mainly for entertainment and how this would lead to an ill-informed population. Sinead O'Connor. Then we called her crazy and mocked her for 2 decades. I mean, she is quite a bit crazy, but that might be because she was put into one of those Magdalene laundry girls prison sweatshops by the Catholic Church as a child. That sort of nonsense will screw you up. Carl Sagan. In his book The Demon-Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Dark, published in 1995, he wrote, I have a foreboding of an America in my children's or grandchildren's time, when the United States is a service and information economy, when nearly all the manufacturing industries have slipped away to other countries, when awesome technological powers are in the hands of a very few, and no one representing the public interest can even grasp the issues, when the people have lost the ability to set their own agendas or knowledgeably question those in authority, when, clutching our crystals and nervously consulting our horoscopes, our critical faculties in decline, unable to distinguish between what feels good and what's true, we slide, almost without noticing, back into superstition and darkness. The dumbing down of American is most evident in the slow decay of substantive content in the enormously influential media, the 30-second sound bites, now down to 10 seconds or less, lowest common denominator programming, credulous presentations on pseudoscience and superstition, but especially a kind of celebration of ignorance. He knew and no one really listened.